Hey guys, it's been a minute. I'm Katrina. This is part 9. I am going to try to do a few videos today just because I haven't been able to. I feel like this really needs to get out, and so I don't want to make them more than like 25 minutes tops because this is just, that's a lot of talking. So I'm going to go ahead and get into this. If y'all haven't seen any of the previous, it probably won't make much sense, so be sure you go back and start from one. Um, So the last I talked about was I had went to the doctor. I had broken my wrist. I started having a lot of back trouble. The doctor said that a girl at age of 12 and 13 shouldn't be complaining that much about their back. They did some tests. They found the imprint of a head of a hammer on my hip from whenever I think I might have been 5 or 6. They also did an MRI on my back, and the discs in my back were really bad. Um, They told me at this time that I would never have children. If I was lucky enough to have a child, they would be premature because my body just wasn't able to handle it. So around this time, my grandmother decided that gymnastics wasn't the best thing since I was already having back trouble. I had already broken a bone. Yeah. And I asked to participate in different school activities, but the answer was always no. She claimed that she couldn't get me back and forth or whatever, so it was always a no. Um, if I wasn't at school, I had to come home and help her with the children that she babysat. I had to cook dinner, had to clean the house. She was getting up in age and started to have health issues. After having she had a surgery on her foot where the bones in her feet, something, they had to put a rod in her foot. Um, so after that, she couldn't babysit children anymore because she wasn't able to get around. Before school, I would wake her up. I would get her to the living room. I would fix her breakfast and lunch, and set plenty of water near her for her to be able to drink and do all that, snacks all day long. When I would get home, I would clean the house. I would fix dinner. Her children were not coming to visit her as much as she had liked. She constantly made remarks about, you would think if their mother was as in bad shape as I am, they would at least come around more, they would care more about me, stuff like that. Um, she talked a great deal about how they lived so close that it wasn't no trouble for them to come visit her and see her. She complained to me about the the one that lived the closest, which was just right up the driveway, seen her the least out of all of them. It was my uncle. It was her only son. Um, she couldn't drive during that time to go see anyone, so she started to give them reasons to come over more. One of the biggest reasons that she would use was saying that I was abusing her. She claimed that I didn't fix food correctly, that sometimes it was unfit for animals to eat. Um, Her big thing was that I was mentally abusive to her because I wouldn't speak to her. I chose to stay in my room during the day. Like if I wasn't out cooking or cleaning or whatever, then I would go to my room. I did have homework to do. So whenever I would try to do my homework, she would ask questions about it and stuff. And then if it was something that she disagreed with, then, or if I just mentioned something from school that I had learned that I thought was pretty cool, she would often say, I'm going to move this right here. Yeah. She would often say that I was lying, that I was coming up with ideas like my dad did, stuff like that, and just to avoid that whole thing, I would just not speak to her. I would go to my room and do my homework. I wouldn't try to sit at the table. If I needed help with my homework, I wouldn't ask her. A lot of the stuff she didn't really understand or know anyway. So I would, call a friend or whatever to try to get me to, or try to get some help with some stuff if I needed it. Let me see where I got to. She said because I would do this that she was left out in the living room all alone all day without any human contact. Um, I don't. I didn't like to talk to her, because of those reasons, but yet she couldn't see it. And stuff that she would say was, "You sound just like your evil daddy, always talking about this off the wall stuff. Don't talk to me, Steve. Get out of my sight." Stuff like that. So after a minute, you're not going to want to be around someone that looks at you like that. She would even rebuke me at times, saying that I had the devil in me and trying to cast it out. Um, Eventually, towards the end, I just completely stopped talking to her altogether. I would answer questions, but that was it. She would often listen to my conversations on the phone with my friends. Later, she tried to use it to start an argument. She called my school and demanded that my teacher know that I had been cheating on my homework. At the time, you got credit for doing your homework, regardless if it was right or if it was wrong. They actually encouraged us to speak to one another, know if it is right or wrong, our different opinions on the matter. So we were instructed, to help each other. And whenever I told her that, she didn't believe me. She said no, that I was a liar and a cheater. My best friend at the time, her name was Lapita, that was the friend that I was accused of cheating on the homework with. And when she was informed we were simply doing what the teacher had instructed, she became even angrier. She claimed that I used my twisted ways to get the school to give me credit instead of graded like all the other children before me. It seemed like no matter what would happen or what I would say, she would still become angry at me. In the 8th grade, I started taking or writing a journal per my therapist. My grandmother would often speak poorly of my aunt that lived walking distance from us. She knew my grandmother didn't care for her, but she only had suspicions and things that people had told her from the past. She asked me one day if I told her that if I would tell her the truth. She of course told, and I told her. She of course then went to my uncle and told my uncle the things that his mother had been saying about her. When he came to talk to my grandmother, I was blamed for lying. She claimed that my bad life had, made me out to be this evil liar and all this other stuff, that I would probably never learn good from bad, truth from a lie. I got grounded for what seems to be a year for telling my aunt what I was told by my grandmother. After my uncle left, she said I wasn't in trouble for lying, I was in trouble for running my mouth. So things like this I would record in my journal. She started to let me have friends come over and to keep me from visiting my aunt's house. I had gotten a lot braver and more able to put words together to explain my emotions. I didn't want my friends to come over because at the time we were living in an old trailer that I had previously lived in with my parents. At this time, it was old. It was untaken care for. We lived close to a dairy farm, and it not being cared for, like mice were not mice. These were rats. These were the kind that you see at a dairy farm. Like these suckers were big. So I was embarrassed. It kind of had a smell about it just from being so close to a dairy farm. It was embarrassing. So let me see where I got to on this. We would have a lot of like ants come in, just all kinds of bugs, and it was just like really, really embarrassing to me. I was sleeping in the room where the acts had taken place. Most of the sexual abuse was in the same room. The gunshot where my dad tried to shoot my mom was in the same room. The same room that where he placed his head to sleep at night was the same room I had to stay in. She said that she would not sleep in that room because that's where he slept. And my uncle refused to even live in the trailer, even though the house up the driveway was my grandmother's. He wouldn't live in that trailer because he wasn't going to have anything to do with it. That's where evil had been. So my grandmother, her son, basically, he got transferred from his job in his house. He was staying in a house for his job, and then whenever he got transferred to another job, I don't know how that worked out to where he said he was taking my grandmother's house, but she just let him. And then moved into the trailer that was my mom's, where she had been with my dad and us as children, and then refused to sleep in the room that he slept in and made me sleep in it. So it was just like, any time there was a loud voice, or if there was, any kind of, I guess, negative energy, it felt like it just multiplied in that place. At least for me. I don't know about for other people, but like, I guess because so much trauma had been there for me, it was just like, I still just going back to the land. The trailer's not even there anymore, and just going back to the land and it's just something happens inside of me. So, my grandmother willingly gave her house and moved into the trailer. I was embarrassed of the shape. I didn't want to be judged by my friends at school. After visiting other friends' house, my situation like really began to bother me. I started to feel that if I could have more stuff and nicer things, I could maybe be happy. I thought maybe the reason my grandmother was so mean was from her not having her things anymore. When my grandmother had nice things, she seemed happier. When people would try to take them from her, she would just let them. I would get angry at the thoughts of having a better living situation, but my grandmother didn't want to fight for it. I had cowered down to my dad for so long. When I got out from under it, I started to see how other people cowered down to the people in their lives as well. This made me want to fight for them, but my grandmother not wanting to reclaim what was rightfully hers made me think of her as weak. I didn't understand why she would just let someone take her things and walk away as if nothing happened. She would tell me I was a coward. I would remind her that I didn't let a stepson kick me out of my own home, and then let my son do the same a few years later. For some reason, a cousin thought it would be better for me to spend some time with them. She got an apartment for her and her children. I wasn't there for a long period of time. I remember it being kind of off and on, maybe on the weekends during school breaks. Her apartment was way better, in way better shape than the old trailer, so I really enjoyed getting away from it. When I would go to other people's houses, I would feel light, like a weight had been lifted off of me. But it felt like the trailer would. Hold on. But it felt like in the trailer I became heavier and grayer. I shared a room with her daughter, who was my brother's age. She had been an only child for a long time. Her brother at this time, I think she was like 12, 13. She was 13 because I was 15. Her brother was maybe like 2. So she had been an only child for a long time. Because she was an only child, a lot of things that whenever you have multiple children, like there's not so many chores, all that kind of stuff. So she wasn't made to clean up her stuff. She lived with her grandparents and her mom for a long time. So a lot of stuff was just taken care of for her. She wasn't made to like really fend for herself. So my cousin would tell her to go clean her room, and she would say it was clean, but it was a lot sloppier than what I was accustomed to my room being. So I would go and I would try to, pick up her things and straighten up stuff, and it would just piss her off. It didn't take long for us to start bumping heads. It was hard for her to be able to share her space, and even though I wasn't like, we didn't have toys to play with or nothing like that, we were out of that age, but still having to share a space with someone and understand someone else's feelings and acknowledge their feelings was kind of hard for both of us. But it was still a lot better than being with my grandmother. My cousin would say I wouldn't do anything that I couldn't do anything in the kitchen. I couldn't wash my clothes or anything else that I felt like needed to be done. I felt like this was her treating me like a helpless small child. Several years now, I had been doing plenty of the kitchen stuff without any supervision at all. I was the only one doing the cooking and the cleaning at home. I didn't understand why she felt I didn't know how to do anything. When I was at her house, I would finally get to the point of not being so much of an adult. By the time I would get back home with my grandmother, I would let things go like I would at my cousin's house. Of course, then trouble would start with my grandmother. This is when she started to claim that I was on drugs. From her standpoint, sometimes I would be on top of everything that needed to be done, and other times I had completely lost interest. When I got to the age of 15, it was my first year in high school. I had like completely had enough. I had started hanging out with a rougher crowd. I was smoking cigarettes and weed. again, lying about where I was, sneaking out my window at night, driving around without a license, and drinking. By now, I had figured out as long as I tell people what they want to hear, it doesn't really matter whether it's the truth or the lie, or a lie. The best part was I didn't get punished either way. Since things with my grandmother were still pretty bad, I tried to stay away from her anyway. To keep the peace, I would ask if I could stay after school to do homework with some other kids. I told her that the teacher would be present, but that was a lie. I would actually do my homework during this time, and most of the time, there weren't other kids around. I had access to the library for stuff that I needed and the internet. When I would get done with my school stuff, if I had any, I would hang out with friends. I usually smoke cigarettes. Sometimes there would be someone in a car. We would go to someone else's house, watch a movie. Other times I would just sit in the cafeteria at school, and I was glad I wasn't at home. My grades actually went up because I had time to do my homework. I had the internet access, for the things that required it, and no one would bother me. Grandmother told me it sounded like study hall, and that's what she told everyone I was attending after school. During a bad fight with my grandmother, she told me she didn't want me there and that she wished that I would just leave. She claimed I ruined her life and the life of my mother. She felt if I had never been born, my mother wouldn't have went to prison. I told her I'd be gone in the morning. She said good. That night I packed my stuff. The next morning I got on the bus with my stuff. A girl that I went to school with, Maria, she was in the crowd that I was hanging out with, and she said that I could stay with her, that her mom wouldn't care. When school let out, we walked to her grandmother's apartment, and later we were picked up by her mother. She brought us home, and then when we were standing in the kitchen at Maria's house, I got an uneasy feeling. I looked at the clock and I knew what time it was. I knew that my grandmother had just got what she wanted. I felt sad, but I felt like I was doing everyone a favor by leaving. Now no one would have to worry about me ever again. Even though I didn't have any recent problems with my family, I still had a lot of anger over how they previously treated me. My grandmother went to the school to pick me up as she usually did. After I did not come out when she arrived, she went to ask where study hall was located. She told them I was attending study hall after school and that it must be running over. They told her there was no such thing as study hall. And if I wasn't outside, then I wasn't there. I'm not sure what story Maria told her mom as far as me being there, but it worked. I cut off my hair. I dyed it. I started to wear very heavy makeup, trying to hide my appearance in public. Since I didn't leave the small town, where my grandmother and all my relatives were, her mother didn't ask me any questions about anything about me altering my appearance. So the boyfriend I had at the time was harassed by my family. They thought for sure I was with him, and if not, they hoped that he would at least know my location. My family didn't know who my boyfriend was. Anytime I had a boyfriend, I was grounded basically until the relationship ended. By about the third boyfriend, I realized if I never told anyone about my boyfriends, I wouldn't suffer any of the consequences. We had only been a couple for a month or so. I had called him once on my cousin's cell phone when I was staying with her. That's how my family got his number. It had been a few days since I had spoken with him. I often told him about wanting to leave my grandmother's house. Like most people, I thought he would thought I was being a rebellious teen. When I would call him, he would hear my grandmother scream and the threats for almost the entire phone call. It didn't take long for him to be more understanding towards my resistance. He didn't know I had run away. When I called, he stated we needed to meet to talk. He told me that I was in too much trouble to be with. He told me I was too much trouble to be with. He was a little older than me and he was scared of going to jail. He claimed I put him in jeopardy as well as myself. I didn't understand why he wasn't glad He could see me whenever he wanted. He complained about how I was never allowed to leave the house. I thought that this way everyone would win and everyone would be happy, but it didn't end up like that. After the breakup, I was scared he would give up my location. I became friends with a guy that Maria knew. The guy told me he had a room for me at his new apartment. From the way he made it sound, I was under the impression that I would have my own room. Oh no. Sorry, that just like jumped like 3 pages. Alright. Okay, so this guy, he gave me the impression that I could go live with him, that he had a spare room, that I would be able to basically just, chill out. And whenever I got there, it turned out that it was him and his family, his sister, his sister's husband, and he had told all of them that I was his girlfriend. So the night that my first night there, he showed me like where to put my stuff at. His sister was just like, "Oh, I'm so glad to finally meet you," even though I'd only known this guy for like a couple weeks. So go up finally, it's time to go to sleep, and I'm just like, okay, but I noticed in the room there's his stuff too. So whenever we go up there, it's like nighttime, people are sleeping, and he is just like expecting me to have sex with him. And I'm just like, what? And I was just like, no, you said you had a place for me to stay. He was like, what, did you honestly think you weren't going to stay here unless you were my girlfriend? And I was like kind of stunned and embarrassed, and I really just didn't know what to do. I just kept telling him that I wasn't ready, to have sex with him, and just praying that I could get through the night without being raped. He would constantly just keep grabbing at me, grabbing at my clothes and stuff. Finally, he quit, after I, kept putting up a fight and just kept saying no, I didn't want to. And needless to say, like, come morning, I was gone. I called a friend that was supposed to be at school. He had a truck, and I was just like, yo, I need a favor. And he was like, what is it? And I was just like, I'm not far from the school. If you can just pick me up and take me anywhere but here. And he said okay that he would, and he brought me to his house. So after that, I had seen the guy, and I was just like, I couldn't even look at him in the face. I felt like I was the one that did something wrong. And the things that happened with my dad, I constantly felt like I was the one that did something wrong, even though I was just the one getting out of the problem or trying to get away from it. It kept feeling like it was me that did it. I, for some reason, kept just acquiring this guilt, hanging on to all this guilt. Um, the friend that I had, his mother was out of the country, and so he said it was okay to stay with him for a little bit because either way his mom wouldn't have known. I tried staying other places, but I kept finding trouble. I would end up back at Maria's house after a night or two at a new place. It seemed like any time, other than this one friend, any time that I tried to rely on a guy that claimed to have my best interest at heart, or that he, was just trying to look out for me, something like this happened where sex was expected in return. I had a card that my grandmother got from the state to help me, or to help her take care of me. I didn't know if I was going to be able to get another payment, so I tried to figure out a way of flipping the money. Maria's mother made us go to a Thanksgiving dinner with her boyfriend. Outside, we talked to a guy that smoked weed, and he told us to mix the weed with sage and to sell it, and that we could make way more money. There were kids from school at the dinner, and they informed me that they informed Maria's mom that I was a runaway. After Maria and I noticed the talk, we both decided that it was best for me to leave. I went to another friend's house, Ashley, who lived just a street over from where the dinner had taken place. I stayed there in fear that the cops may find me anywhere else. Her family knew I had ran away and was glad that I was safe. Her mom told me that I could stay as long as I wanted without fear of the police. She knew about the way my grandmother treated me after her daughter spent the night a few times. Her mother would often ask my grandmother if she minded me staying at their house just to give us both some space from one another. But my grandmother would always make these excuses. No, your daughter has to come over. I have to keep my eye on her. You just don't understand how she is, stuff like that. Um, I didn't want to put them at risk or get them in trouble or fear the wrath of my grandmother or her children, or whatever. So after, I had ate a few good meals, which didn't have many during this time, um, I went ahead and hit the road and went and bought some weed. So we got to Maria's house with her mom not there. We mixed it with sage. There was a party that weekend, and I had planned to sell it there. So I'm going to stop right here and start another one. I will see y'all in a bit.